Hey, what's up, guys? Time to get some Q&A questions done. It's July 8th, 2017. This thread was from yesterday. Tried to limit this one to about 6 to 8 questions. Looks like I'm closer to like the 8 to 10 mark, but we'll get those knocked out. Some really good ones here, kind of a mixture in topics. So let's see what we have. Pros and cons of basal insulin. They use Lantus, for example, versus GDAs like berberine, glucophage as support for high dose growth hormone protocol. Okay, so this one's, excuse me, this one's going to kind of depend on blood sugar levels and how you're reacting to the growth hormone and what you mean by high. A really good discussion on this. Actually, Colette Nelson had a couple episodes, which a lot of people have already seen, about using basal insulin, and she breaks it down really well. Essentially, in excess, in a higher dose of growth hormone, probably going to lean towards the Lantus side of things, just because it's going to be easier to control glucose levels. So, if you're starting, let's use high. Okay, we're going to say high. So we're going to say like eight units a day. Could be more. I'm not sure exactly what you mean by high, but you do it for 5 days, 7 days. Test fasted glucose levels, test glucose levels a couple hours post carbohydrate meal, and see where you're at. Knowing your base also, but you should see, okay, is it creeping up? What's going to creep up some? Or is it staying pretty level? Am I getting into the high 90s? Am I getting close to 100? At which point you're probably going to lean towards the insulin side of things, and you could also use GDAs too if you wanted, just because the mechanisms, depending on what you're using, is not going to be exactly the same. But with the Lantus, I mean, it's essentially you're giving the beta cells a break, because even though your pancreas might be keeping up with the amount of glucose and clearing it, you might have high insulin levels, in which case a little bit of insulin is not a terrible idea, just because it's going to kind of rest those beta cells, if you will, and then you need to produce less on your own. And that's not to say that you need a lot. You can start really low. It might only be something like, with Lantus, it's supposed to be 24 hours. It tapers off before then, so maybe twice a day would be a little bit better. But, it might be 4 units twice a day. That's really low. It could be 5. But, you're going to start on the lower end, and then, depending on your body weight, and then retest those glucose, see where you're at. Ideally, keeping it maybe in the 80s, even the high 70s if you can. So that's probably going to be a little bit better bet. And with the Lantus, let's say your body starts going a little bit hypo, it's going to produce just a little bit of glucose to balance it out. It releases so slowly that it's pretty hard to mess up. It's not like hammer and Humalog where if you go hypo, you go hypo. You got to correct it, which isn't necessarily, having to do that over and over again is not necessarily a good thing. So the Lantus may be a better bet, may actually be healthier. In a lower dose, like 2 to 3, 4 units of the growth, you may not even need it. You may just, GDAs could be perfectly fine. So kind of depend on dose, and then, maybe start with the GDAs, and then, in a week retest and see if you need to actually add the insulin in. And if you are running a pretty high dose and your blood glucose still looks good, it's not a terrible idea to actually get your insulin levels checked fasted, just to see, is my body just, hyperinsulinemia, where it's just overproducing insulin to try to keep up, because that's also not good. So a couple things to think about. Hope that wasn't too running a circle there. Your opinion on beef protein isolate, like Muscle Med's carnivore, is it good or whey? As far as like amino acid profile, whey is probably going to be a little bit better. I'm not in the supplement industry, though. From what I understand, most beef protein isolate is like collagen or gelatin, I believe. I want to say gelatin, like hydrolyzed gelatin, but because collagen's not necessarily the same thing. But the amino acid profile is not that good. A lot of them will add some additional aminos, like you might see leucine on the label or all BCAAs on the label. In which case, it's not like it's a bad thing. I mean, there's adequate leucine there for muscle protein synthesis. So if you can't use whey, I mean, it's not necessarily going to be a bad thing as long as there's enough leucine there. My dog's whining. What's that, bud? But unless you can't use a good whey isolate for some reason, then I would probably just stick to that. Next question, random question edition. Are you religious? It's a good question. So science and religion typically don't mix very well, though they can. I would say no, I don't conform to a religion necessarily. I have religious people in my family. A lot of my family's Catholic. Call that a religion. That's kind of a get away with a lot when you're Catholic. But at times it's kind of been something that was intriguing from like a historical standpoint, but just with the sciencey part of me, I wasn't raised in that environment. My immediate family is not religious. It was more like my grandparents and aunts and uncles and stuff. My mom and dad aren't. And not bashing it, but I just wasn't really raised in that environment, and I have a sciencey state of mind, and it's just hard for me to connect with something that I have no proof of, and there is no proof of, and having a lot of things happen in my life, and it's just seeing other people that have had a lot of things happen. It's hard for me to believe that a higher power would not make things better for people. To keep it simple without going into huge discussion, I would say maybe that I'm spiritual, because I would definitely feel that there are things that happen that are unexplainable and out of our control and possibly a little bit supernatural, if you want to use that word. So I think there's definitely things that we can't explain, and maybe we'll be able to explain them years from now. Maybe science will catch up. But I think there'll probably always be things that we can't explain, and you could always make that argument that there are higher powers. I don't conform to a set religion. Is Winstrol one of the most toxic oral, or is it almost like VAR? Well, I wouldn't say either of those are the most toxic necessarily, but I mean, they have different toxicities. The thing about Anavar is that a lot of people say that it's easier on the liver, which it typically is, so they think that it's not toxic, when really it's actually harder on the kidneys, which is not good. The liver's, in reality, you're probably better off hitting your liver for a little while, because it's going to regenerate and heal up pretty easy, with support supplements and stuff, versus hitting your kidneys, hammering your kidneys, and because that's a whole different ball of wax. So both are toxic, and I've seen blood work from Anavar that just crushes lipids bad. So it depends on what you mean by toxicity, and it's all dose dependent. But as far as gram for gram, milligram for milligram type of toxicity, there's definitely things that are more toxic. Halodrol, or not halodrol, like the prohormone, halotestin, Superdrol, things like that, where 10, 20 milligrams are pretty much going to fuck your blood work up. Pretty much guarantee that. Don't want to use them very long. Methyltren, all that shit. I wouldn't say those are the most toxic at all. If you could use only 3 muscle building recovery supplements and 3 supplements for health and longevity, which would they be and why? Okay, so this question is going to be, I'm going to tailor it towards me just because you're asking me. The muscle building thing might be kind of universal from person to person, but the health supplement I think is going to be an individual thing, just depending on what the person's ailments might be or what their health's like naturally. What's up, bud? So, muscle building, specifically asking muscle building, that's hard. I don't know if there's any that I have to have. I could say creatine monohydrate, just because tried and true, lots of literature, it's cheap. You can get it through food, but I think that it's a solid addition. Let's see what else. I mean, there's other ones that I take. I can't say that they're necessary. I would say something that is going to help with nitric oxide, a good vasodilator. I like agmatine sulfate, and that's one of my favorite pump ingredients, along with something that's for super hydration. So probably like a Hydromax glycerol. If I could combine those three, which is pretty much what I do, I think I'd be good. Three supplements for health and longevity. For me, a good fish oil or krill oil, I think that's important for most people, and especially me. Genetically, I struggle with my lipid profile, so that's definitely an important one. Always heart health is very important. And I would probably say citrus bergamot. I use the Jarrow formulas. Just again, lipid. That's just something that's very important to me. My liver and kidney values have always been pretty solid. There's nothing really there. I'm trying to think of what a third one might be, because I take a bunch. Take a lot of different health supplements. I'm just trying to think, what would be most important. Dang. I would say, can I skip the third one? I don't know. I don't even know what a third one would be, to be completely honest, that I would consider necessary. I take so many damn supplements. I'll think about it. If I think of anything, I'll come back to it. Dry carbs such as uncooked oats or Rice Krispies, pulling carbs faster and also them being more dense and absorbing faster. So I'm assuming for like carbohydrate loading maybe, or just in a general sense, I'm not sure. I definitely wouldn't be eating dry oats. That'd probably mess my stomach up. Maybe. I used to, but I can't tolerate a lot of uncooked oats anymore for whatever reason. Now, in like a loading situation, it can be good to control water intake if you're watching that and not getting a lot of water in the carbohydrate itself during the meal. But I mean, there's others that you can use too. Potatoes, I mean, it's pretty easy to use, even if they're cooked. I don't really buy into that a lot, to be honest. I've never really seen a difference. I think it's mainly that you just don't over consume fluids with the meals if it's a big carbohydrate meal. That way it's not pulling a lot of water into the GI, watering down digestive acids and causing digestive issues or slowing digestion down. Especially something like oats where it's really fibrous. Especially in like soluble fibers, you don't want a bunch of water being pulled into your GI tract. So that's something to consider. But I don't really have much water with meals anyhow, and I usually don't suggest it, so I don't think it's like a huge issue, regardless of what carb you're eating, unless it's, like a huge bowl of cereal and it's just all almond milk or something in there and you got a bunch of fluid. Other than that, I don't really see a huge benefit. And that's having tons of people for shows. So thoughts on OTC prescription sleeping meds to counteract insomnia experienced by enhanced athletes or other sleep recommendations. I'll send you a link to this one. I'm not sure if you saw the article that I wrote about sleep. I wrote about basically all the lifestyle factors that you need to consider, and those are huge when it comes to sleep, and a lot of people don't consider them, and there's so many things that people do that affect their sleep that they don't even realize it, and it's just normal. A lot of people do it, and they don't know, and that will change your sleep drastically. Now, as far as supplements go, it kind of depends on what you're using. Some of the stronger stuff I wouldn't suggest using on a daily basis, but if there are nights that you really need to sleep and you know that you have something important coming up tomorrow or whatever it is, or you have some anxiety that day, Phenibut is probably about one of the stronger things over the counter that you're going to get. But again, I definitely wouldn't use that every day. Usually 250 milligrams can be noticeable, up to 500, 750, depending on the person. That's going to work on GABA. Again, you don't want to hammer GABA over and over and over. If it's something for enhanced athletes, let's say example like tren, people have issues sleeping. That's normally a serotonin issue. It'll actually deplete serotonin, so 5-HTP would be good at that point. 100 to 300 milligrams before bed. Melatonin, things like that. But you got to look at what is depleted and what do you actually need rather than just throw sleeping supplements at it. People are like, oh, I'll use this because it worked for me. Well, is it a GABA issue? Is it a serotonin issue? Is it a melatonin issue? All these hormones are working in your body to help control sleep cycle. Is it that you just are not winding down at night, adequately before bed and your nervous system's activated? Are you staring at a bright screen before you go to bed? I'll go ahead and send you that link to the article, and it pretty much covers everything and what to use when, so you can see it all. Last one, exercise execution question. How do you engage your chest on a dumbbell chest pullover? I feel a little in the chest, but my back seems to do most of the load. So with the dumbbell pullover with chest emphasis, the main difference is I don't let it sink back as far, so you're not stretching, you're not letting the latch stretch out as much. You're more working the top, and I'll actually pull it past my pec. And when I do it, I'll do it with a little bit straighter arm, so almost like I'm extending my arms slightly as I move forward to contract the pec. Kind of maybe squeeze my elbows in and contract the pec. You have to play with the range of motion, but off the top of my head, I don't think I really come back past my head as far as like how far I let the dumbbell go. It's a much shorter range of motion, and that will engage the pecs a lot more and keep the lats out of it. They're going to engage a little bit, but again, a little bit straighter arms, kind of squeeze the pecs at the top. And you should feel a lot more doing it that way versus going all the way back and engaging your lats, which makes it a lat pullover. So I think that's all the questions here, guys. I really appreciate these. These are really good questions, and I'll get this video up soon. Thank you.